Thank you. We're joined by my colleagues, Council President Letterman, Councilor Govan, and Councilor Hurst. See, we also have two members of the media. Hi, Patrick. Hi, Paul. Thank you for joining, and our friends at Focus Springfield. So I'm the chair of this committee. The other two members are Councilors Walsh and Edwards, who are not here today. And we have one agenda item on for today, which is remote participation, changes in local rules on that question, and changes to state law on that question. So I'm glad we have Council President Letterman here, who I think is prepared to speak a little bit to that issue and how the council will function as we transition into the later stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Mr. President, do you want to talk to us about the rules and the new executive order?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for calling the meeting, and to our colleagues who are able to be present this afternoon. We have a couple of developments relative to our planned return to chamber, as well as to the status of the open meeting law and the possibility of continued either virtual, remote, or hybrid participation. And if you'll just bear with me one moment, there's an emergency vehicle passing in front of my house that was creating some background noise. So a couple of things. So number one, I believe that it is important that the City Council begin preparing to return to the City Council chambers for regular and hearings meetings. The school committee has returned to chambers. Our employees are back in person, and I think it is important for the business of the City Council at regular and hearings meetings to take place in the City Council chamber and at City Hall with public participation. With that said, I think that we have seen over the course of the last 2 years the benefit of virtual participation, both in emergency situations, as well as an opportunity to engage the public and to engage individuals who may be far away from us, i.e. an official from Boston or Washington, D.C., or really anywhere that we may want to receive testimony from. And so I've been looking at how we can facilitate that type of continued option in certain circumstances after we return to the chamber. So I want to give the committee an update on where we are currently, what I'd like to see the council do, and then take any questions and have any discussion necessary relative to how we might move forward. First and foremost, it was my intention to call us back for our first in-person meeting at the August 22nd hearings meeting. However, since that time, it has become clear that the state legislature is not in a position to, at this very moment, extend the emergency procedures that allowed for fully virtual meetings. And we did anticipate that that would occur. The House and the Senate both passed individual extensions that would allow that to occur and would have allowed our Monday meeting to remain virtual. The Monday meeting remaining virtual made sense for a number of reasons. Chief among them that we have a number of hearings that we are closing out that began as virtual hearings and need to allow for that notice to stand. However, because that extension will not take place, the open meeting law classification that allows us to have a fully virtual meeting will expire on July 15th. And in speaking with our legislative delegation and their staff, while they believe an extension will come or a renewal will come in the future, it likely will not be in place maybe as late as July 30th as they work through the differences in the House and Senate bill. It was very important to me to not cancel the meeting on Monday. We do have businesses that are waiting on hearings. We have departments that are waiting on votes. And so I felt it was critical that we be able to continue that. And as such, sought the legal opinion of our law office and found that we are able to have a meeting in person on Monday with virtual participation, as long as we have 7 members, a quorum of our body present in person, and then we can allow for virtual participation by the remaining members and the public. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but we are in a position to do that on Monday. And in fact, it is a good example of the remote policy that I am hoping to implement fully for the council. So with that said, What the remote participation policy for the council that I'm proposing we adopt will look like is that we will call in-person meetings for hearings and regular meetings of the city council. Individuals will be expected to attend in person, both members of the body and members of the public. However, we will be able to allow for remote participation under the following circumstances and with the approval of the chair. Either a personal or family illness, a temporary personal disability, an emergency situation, military service, or significant geographic distance due to unforeseen circumstances. And this is allowable under the existing open meeting law. Regardless of any emergency order, we can allow for virtual participation under these circumstances as long as we authorize it and as long as we have 7 members of the body present in the chamber and the chair is present in the chamber. If the chair was not present in the chamber but participating remotely, the vice chair would need to be present in the chamber and would need to conduct the responsibilities of the chair. With this being said, I've met with Focus Springfield and our finance department about what we need to do to equip both the city council chamber, the school committee chamber, and our committee meeting room to be able to do this seamlessly. Obviously, for those that are participating, we want to have the opportunity to be able to make sure they are integrated fully into the meeting. And Focus Springfield has let us know what necessary improvements need to be made a commitment to making those improvements, and the finance office is committed to supporting those commitments or those improvements over the next several months. And so I think this is an important step for us to take. The mayor did issue an executive order this week, and that executive order is the necessary first step in allowing these types of remote policies to be adopted. The open meeting law requires the chief executive of the city to generally authorize remote meetings, and then it is up to us to adopt our own policy on how we would follow through on implementation. And I want to thank, before we open it up to questions, I want to thank Tom Moore from the law office, law department, who helped us to draft this in accordance with the open meeting law. Also want to thank Tom Ash and the mayor for getting the executive order signed. And I want to thank Steve Carey from Focus Springfield for his consultation relative to what we need to do to get the chamber and committee room. And really, actually, we've looked at every meeting room in City Hall to be accessible in this way. So we can have the city of Springfield prepared for the, really kind of the next phase of continuity of government in these types of situations. So that's a broad overview of the remote participation policy. We can get into some more details if councilors have questions. I do want to talk about committee meetings because I think there is significant conversation to be had there relative to how we'll move forward with that. But just relative to the regular and hearings meetings, do folks have any questions or comments on how we'll move forward in that vein?
I don't see any questions, but we're also joined by Councilor Edwards. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, member of the committee. I have one question, Jesse, and actually maybe two. The first is, what is the current condition of the chambers? I know that at one point they were going to be adding in plexiglass screening, and I believe that happened, but I just don't know what the current situation is. Are those barriers staying up or coming down?
So the chamber is currently outfitted with plexiglass dividers between all councilor stations and in front of the city clerk, as well as at the podium by which the public would participate. Those are currently still up, and in consultation with the health commissioner, her recommendation was that those remain up. The school committee has kept theirs up. And so her recommendation at this time is that we keep those barriers in place.
Okay. And then my second question is regarding voice votes. My reading of the regulation is that we can't do any as long as one person is participating remotely. And just speaking as one member of 13, that has very frustratingly added a lot of time to otherwise ministerial votes over the course of the last 2 years. I mean, we have spent days of our lives, no pun intended, talking about suspension of ordinary rules, and it has to be a roll call vote every time. Is that going to remain the case as long as one person is participating remotely?
That is a great question, Councilor Fenton, and I certainly share your frustration with that. But that is a component of the open meeting law that we cannot change. So if an individual is participating remotely, we have to take a roll call vote on each and every action by the council, including routine votes like suspension of rules. Certainly, you know, in my time as president over the last month and a half, we've only had a handful of meetings, but I've certainly attempted to implement some parliamentary procedures to shorten the time that we spend on that. And I think we've had fairly efficient meetings with regard to those implementations. But that would be the case if we were assembled as a body and there was a remote participant of the body, not if we were bringing somebody in to testify, but if there was a remote participant who was a voting member of the body, we would need to take a roll call vote on all matters.
Oh, thank you. I agree. You've been great about trying to make it more efficient. Thank you. Councilor Hurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a limit on the number of meetings that folks can participate remotely?
Not in this proposed policy, Councilor Hurst.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And I don't see any other questions for now.
Just relative to that question, though, I mean, if you read the description in the sort of preamble to the policy, it makes clear, and also the open meeting law and the Attorney General's guidance on the open meeting law makes clear that, you know, absent an emergency authorization, the expectation for public bodies is that they do appear in person. And so these policies are not meant to be necessarily for the convenience of members, but more so for the continuity of government and the recognition that we still remain in an uncertain time, right? We know that there are still individuals who are, for example, getting COVID, but also the COVID-19 pandemic has made us more aware of health challenges that colleagues and family members and participants from the public may have. And so it's really meant to accommodate those type of circumstances. And the hope would be that if an individual is able to be present in person, that they would be present in person for regular hearings meetings. I think we'll talk about committees in a minute.
No, understood. I for some reason I felt like the school committee had a limit of 3, but you know, as long as we feel like folks aren't going to take advantage of it and abuse the remote meetings, then you know, I assume we should be all set.
That is my hope as well, Councilor Hurst. If they have one, my understanding would be that they would have imposed that themselves. I didn't see anything about that, at least in the guidance from the AG's office or in the open meeting law. I would like to, you know, allow councilors the opportunity. I trust folks to be professional, you know, in making those recommendations, and certainly I intend to be professional as the chair in ruling on them. But ultimately, our hope is, you know, that members will see fit to attend in person and will do so whenever they are able.
Fair enough.
Any other questions before we move on to committees? Well, Jesse, could you just say when this starts?
So the executive order is effective immediately, allowing us to call a meeting of this kind. I've placed this on the agenda for Monday night. My hope is that we will vote to adopt it as a part of our rules on Monday night. I think as the chair, I theoretically can implement it unilaterally because the executive order gives me the authority to set the policy. But I think it's important that we have buy-in from the council, which is, you know, why I asked for this meeting to be called. And I certainly, you know, I'm always a believer in our legislative process. So I think our policies in legislation are always better at the end of this process than they are in the beginning. So my hope, though, would be that we adopt this Monday night and that we utilize this moving forward from our August 22nd meeting onward. One thing I will say is there is a provision in the policy that I propose that we adopt relative to the requirement that there be 7 or a majority of the members present in person. Certainly, we want that to be the case as much as possible. However, if the emergency order is extended and there are legitimate circumstances that lead to 7 members not being able to be present in the chamber, that provision would be suspended. So if we had a situation where, you know, we have a regular meeting scheduled and there is a, you know, say the pandemic took a different turn, a turn that we hope it does not take, but there was really a situation where it was not safe for us to meet in person, for the public to meet in person, or for if members just were not able to attend due to circumstances relative to the policy. If the quorum is suspended statewide, I will approve a meeting without a quorum physically present. But at the moment, it is required that a quorum be physically present, and we are not able to waive that locally.
All right. Why don't you go on to committee meetings?
So on committee meetings, first and foremost, I think that we all agree that the virtual committee meetings have allowed for a lot of discussion to take place that's been really beneficial. It's been beneficial for the public's inclusion. It's been beneficial for counselors and department heads to be able to get on a meeting. I mean, this meeting that we're having right now, is beneficial and certainly in service to the mission of the council and service to the city. So I've heard from many counselors that they would like to be able to continue to hold virtual committee meetings, and I do see value in that. There's a couple of things to consider. So number one, assuming that there was no emergency extension and we were just under the general open meeting law of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts with no amendments, you could hold a virtual committee meeting, but you would be subject to those same guidelines that we just talked about for the regular meeting, except for it would be in the form of the committee. And so the chair of the committee would need to be present at the posted location, and a quorum of the committee would need to be present at the posted location. So you could certainly have you would have to have a second member of the committee or the president of the city council present with you. We are actually going to attempt to do this on Monday. I spoke with Councilor Whitfield, who has the normal finance committee meeting that would be scheduled prior to our regular meeting. And so we are going to hold that meeting at City Hall with virtual participation allowed. And Councilor Whitfield and myself will be there to ensure quorum, as well as any other members of the finance committee that are able to. But at that point, you would be able to have virtual participation from members of the public, anybody you wanted to invite, any department heads, and any other counselors that the chair of that committee approved to participate virtually. That's really what we're bound to under the open meeting law. That's why when we met to discuss the upgrades to the chamber, I wanted to make sure that the committee room was included in that. And so that improvement will look like a large screen in the committee room, mic'd up so that you can zoom, and cameras turned back on so that you can zoom folks in easily to the committee room. But that is how we would have to proceed under the current open meeting law. If the emergency extension does go back into effect, I think it is appropriate for us to continue to hold virtual committee meetings at the discretion of the chair of that committee through the extension. I think the virtual committee meetings are valuable for both the council and members of the public. And if a chair wanted to hold an in-person committee meeting, they certainly would have the ability to do so, once we're back in the chamber.
But not for the, I'm sorry, see if anybody else has a question. Okay, but that wouldn't apply, Jesse, for the regular meeting. So if the executive or if the state law was extended, then you wouldn't anticipate amending this council rule to allow for exclusively remote regular meeting participation like we've been doing for the last 2 years. You'd want to continue to do a quorum in the chamber and the parliamentarian in the chamber with an opportunity for some to participate remote as long as they have a justifiable reason.
That is correct. Barring an increase in the emergency circumstances, I think it's important for us to return to the chamber.
If there's an increase in emergency circumstances, will you decide that? And or are we gonna have to vote on that? Or is that to be determined?
So under the emergency order, my understanding is that the meetings are sort of, the chair calls the meeting and sets the location and the volume. Certainly the city council is a legislative body. As president, my responsibilities include facilitation. So if members felt that circumstances had reached the point where we needed to hold fully virtual meetings again, I would hope that we could have a discussion about that and make that decision at that time. But I think looking at the circumstances as they exist today, given that the school committee has returned to chamber, given that all of our staff have returned to their offices, I think it's important that the business of the city council take place in the city council chamber.
Okay. Well, I am now crystal clear on this subject. Does anybody have any questions? Nobody. Okay. So, Jesse, do you have anything else to add?
Just that for Monday's meeting, one thing we will be doing is Focus Springfield is working on getting our chamber ready for this type of meeting, but it is not yet ready. And so we will actually be holding the in-person portion of our meeting on Monday in the conference room, the new conference room that the mayor has been utilizing on the second floor. That room is much more equipped for the type of hybrid participation that we're going to be seeing at Monday's meeting. I do anticipate that the majority for Monday's meeting, that the majority of the public is probably going to be remote because of the fact that it was originally noticed as a virtual meeting. We've renoticed it as an in-person meeting with virtual participation. But for this meeting, because of the nature of it and because these hearings started as virtual and because we're sort of jumping back into this relative to the events that have occurred at the state level, I am going to approve any member of the public or anybody coming for a hearing to participate virtually. So we may have some folks in person, but for the most part, I'm expecting we'll have the 7 counselors that have agreed to appear in person, some members of staff, and then the majority of folks will likely be remote for this meeting just because of the circumstances that it is under.
Okay, Counselor Edwards had a question.
Just the size of that room, considering I know that it's been advertised as being a remote meeting, but if we have considerable large number of people show up, then you've got that room isn't designed to house a whole lot of people from the public, and that's under the assumption that all our colleagues are fully boosted, fully vaccinated, because we are examples of what's supposed to be done right in the city. But when it comes to the public, they all have the right to bring it, just like we do. Is there a contingency plan if a whole lot of people show up that traditionally would have been spaced out a little bit more, at least some distance in the chamber as a whole?
So staff, when they are doing the follow-up on participation in this meeting, are encouraging people to participate virtually so that we hopefully do not encounter that. In speaking with the health commissioner, and I'll be sending out through staff a recommendation that everybody wear masks in the room during the meeting. So that will be going out as well, and we will be spacing out the public seating that is relative to that. And that's after consultation with the health commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Just one, I guess that led to one last question for me, Jesse. Did you say that we'll have to wear masks in the chamber?
So my strong recommendation to individuals participating in our meeting on Monday and anybody in the room will be that they wear a mask, and we will have masks available.
Okay. Well, this is a really difficult needle to thread. And we have one more question, but I just wanted to say that I think that this is a tough job, but one you've handled really well. So thank you for spending all this time and trying to figure this out. It's not easy to come back in any form after the pandemic and do it in a transparent and accountable and fair way, both to the public and to the members of the council, especially considering the health risks and the moving target of health risk that's involved in this. So, Councilor Govan?
I guess my question came up with masks. I know I agree with Councilor Edwards. That room that, if it's the same room that I'm thinking of, is where we had the Women's Commission meeting. I think it's the same room. It's not that big. And if the counselors who are going to be there, hopefully there'll be 7 at least. It has to be at least 7, being spread apart. Hopefully there won't be a lot of audience participation. I mean, not in person rather, but they'll be virtually, hopefully, like they have been, and I hope they'll continue to be. I just, I'm thinking about the mask situation because personally, if I have to wear a mask, I don't think I want to come in person then. Just my opinion. Doesn't mean I'm not going to, but you know, that's something that I would want to consider because it's been, it's just very uncomfortable. I know it's safe and I know that's the safest way to be. So that if that's the case, my preference would be not to be in person for myself, if that were the case. And I know that's not an emergency. The reasons why you said not to be in person were very broad, which is good, I guess. So just my opinion. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. This has been a very tough.
Thank you, Counselor. Certainly let me be clear that my intention was for our meeting on the 18th to be a virtual meeting. Most of the state was under the impression that this emergency order would be extended. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned, the House and Senate did pass extensions, but they did not pass the same extension. And so that has led to what seems to be sort of a conference committee situation. I was in touch with our legislative delegation and their staff members literally hourly throughout this week, as recently as this afternoon, trying to see, what would occur relative to that. But once we got word that it was pretty clear that they would not extend this until likely the end of the month, we really had to make a call. And given that, we were able to see 7 counselors commit to participating in person and enough counselors also being able to participate virtually, I felt that it wouldn't be fair to the businesses that are waiting for their hearings to be voted on or for the departments that are waiting for their votes to cancel the meeting. Even if we were to cancel it, we would have had to reschedule it probably under sort of somewhat similar circumstances. But relative to the physical nature of that room, I'm going to be there tomorrow with Steve Carey, and we will certainly be evaluating the best setup for it and any contingency plans for if we do have a larger body of individuals show up. Although I'm thinking based on our agenda and based on our communication with those that are coming before us, that we should be okay for this meeting. And relative to our decisions on activities within the meeting, certainly want to continue to confer with the health commissioner on her recommendations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Councilor Edwards.
But Mr. President, you kind of touched on that last part. I hadn't looked at the agenda and took account, but I mean, I don't know the volume of people anticipated on who have items before us, but we don't generally allow them into the room, or have historically not allowed them into the room. And, they come in all as one group. Is there a particular reason why we can't do it in the chamber?
The reason why we cannot do it in the chamber is because the chamber is not yet equipped for the hybrid participation. So we have at least 2 counselors, possibly 3, who are going to be participating virtually because they are not able to be present in person for this meeting. And as you'll recall, we also have we are down 1 member because we have not yet filled the Ward 5 seat. That election is happening in the next 2 months. So in order for them to be able to participate in a way that allows the meeting to move forward, we need to be in a room that is mic'd up, that has the proper screen and the proper acoustics. Our chamber will be prepared for that for our August 22nd meeting, but it is not yet prepared for it because we were anticipating that this meeting would be virtual.
All right, 2 quick questions. First one is that, well, maybe just one, but is it appropriate or is it necessary for the members of the committee who are present to make a recommendation to the committee of whole, which is traditional when we on these types of things, or is this just for our own information of who chose to participate?
That would certainly be at the discretion of the committee. It is not necessarily required, but would gladly be appreciated.
I'm set then.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, so Councilor Edwards and I are the members of the committee. Speaking for myself, I think this is a really well thought out policy. I also just want to declare to my colleagues that I really don't think this is the end of the discussion. I think that we'll pass this, and this is the best shot. I know that President Letterman is taking at the future deliberations of the council. But if there's one thing we learned over the last 2 years, it's that we've got to be able to adjust and adjust in a way that's accountable and transparent. So I would support a motion to approve this policy and would anticipate supporting it on Monday night and look forward to continuing to reinvent and adapt government to make it accessible to the people and safe.
So moved.
Okay, so it's just you and I, Melvin, so I'm going to second that.
And aye.
Okay, all those in favor would be aye, and I am also in favor. So we'll make a positive recommendation at the council meeting on Monday night. And again, just thank you, President Letterman, for putting the time and effort in to answer some really tough questions that have a lot of different angles to them. So thank you for entertaining our questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to everybody. I do want to make one other thing really clear before we adjourn, which is, of course, our meetings will continue to be streamed for members of the public. So we've always streamed our meetings, I think, since Councilor Fenton was president. All of our meetings have been streamed live, hearing and regular. Our committee meetings have previously been recorded and then posted after the fact. We will continue to do that as well. So in terms of just public viewing, that will continue regardless of the mode that we are in. We'll always have that continue. More so, this is about remote participation of members of the body, and then at the chair's discretion, certainly members of the public when necessary as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Everybody
Bye.
be safe.